must have been good lasagna. Paisley had 2 plates full. If a kid will eat that much lasagna, it must be good. We're glad you're here tonight. If you came in, there's a listening sheet and a prayer sheet on the table out in the foyer. The listening sheet might help you stay awake if you take notes. No, the main thing it does, it helps you keep up with what's going on. And also the prayer sheet is there, and I want to tell you about a couple of folks. Lynette Vinson, surgery was successful. She is out of the surgery. It was a long surgery too. And Jody let us know that the doctor gave a good report. He believes that he fixed the problem. And so that is just awesome. So continue to pray for them. She'll be up there for a period of time longer. But the other good news they got was that she will be able to come home sooner than the doctor said it went so well. He thinks she's going to be able to come home sooner than they thought. So that's good news too. Then, thank you. If you would continue to pray for Jim Houck. He's recovering from some medication like facial chemo that they gave him for some skin cancers and things, and they cut out some things, and he has not been able to kind of be out in public. And if you'll continue to remember him, they may be even watching tonight. They are? Okay. And we are going to begin, I guess, televising Sunday night as well, televising, what we call it, live streaming the Foundations class. So if any of you would like to watch that, because a lot of people can watch it at a later time. And we need to make sure that Jim could properly run this thing. I mean, not Jim, but Greg could properly run this thing before we put it on live. So we would, so it wouldn't reflect poorly on the church. Yeah. Yeah. Now see? Oh, I could have gone with that. Now the people that are on live stream, they're going right now, what in the world are all these people talking about? Well, some things you just have to be here, right? Just to experience it. But thank y'all for being here tonight. If you would, continue to lift up Lynette and Jim, and there's a whole host of people. I know Beverly's going for a test tomorrow, and we got a lot of folks having some tests done. So lift those folks up in prayer. And if you have someone to add to the prayer list, if you'll give it to Anita, she'll add it and take off any that need to be taken off. We'd love to take care of that. If you would also pray for our services this Sunday. This Sunday is a different Sunday. We're having an organization called Adventures in Truth that's going to be here. And Dr. Jim Rankin, who is a biblical archaeologist, he's also has been a pastor, I believe, and he's coming here to share with us kind of his lifelong work. And basically been working in the country of Ethiopia quite extensively. And how many of you know that there's a Christian connection with Ethiopia? You know where Ethiopia is, don't you? It's further south than Egypt. And one of the primary connections, it might be, which what? Of Ethiopia. Yeah. And Matthew did as well. Matter of fact, they believe that Matthew was martyred in Ethiopia. Matthew, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew. So there's some connections. I imagine we'll get a good dose of Ethiopia this Sunday. So I hope you'll be here. It'll be kind of an unusual service. And I do want you to know we'll be taking the regular offering for the church kind of at the beginning. And then there will be a love offering that will be taken for him for the ministry that he's doing in Ethiopia, because it's really a mission work that he does. And also there will be some books and things that might interest you. So the only reason I'm telling you this is we sometimes do these kinds of things. People, if I wished I'd known, I'd brought more money, or I'd done this, or I'd done that. So I'm trying to let you know ahead of time. So hope you'll be here. All right, tonight we're going to pick up from where we left off last week, except for one condition. I'll tell you that in a minute. Matthew chapter 5:21, it says, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." And then we went on and covered the next few verses where Jesus was teaching us and telling us how important it was that we not even become angry, because anger leads, the root of murder is rooted and grounded in what? In anger management issues. And we also found out last week, is there a right kind of anger? There's a righteous anger, and there's a wrong kind of anger. So it's the wrong anger that what we're dealing with, primarily. And that's kind of where we left off last week, is Jesus' teaching on murder. Remember, he's going to give us 6 examples from the law and from the Old Testament. He's given us 6 examples, and this is the first example, taking the law against murder, where he's going to teach us how important it is that our righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Because if it doesn't, he said, you will no way enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he's showing us the true intent of the law. And that the law still has, even though we're in the age of grace, the law still has practical purpose for us today. And we covered that pretty extensively over the last few weeks. But tonight, I hate to tell you, we've got to take a critical pause. This is still going to relate to what we've been doing, but we're going to have to pause from the Sermon on the Mount. I'm not going down to the next verse and so forth and so on because of this, and you'll see why after we get through. How many of you notice we live in a real critical age? People are very critical. They're critical of the church. They're critical of the Bible. They're critical of Jesus. We live in a critical age. Matter of fact, they call the study of the Bible in a lot of our universities textual criticism. They're very critical of everything. And one of the reasons I want to take a critical pause is I'm going to give to you two questions that you're going to have to answer in this critical age that we live in today. These are 2 things that if you sit down and you talk with someone who's an unbeliever right across the table from you, I guarantee you one, if not both of these questions are going to come up. And I want you to be thoroughly equipped to enter into this age of Babylon that we're certainly entering into, in which you're going to need to be able to apologetically answer the questions that are there. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, "In your hearts revere Christ as Lord, and always be prepared to give an" what? "Answer to everyone ask you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." This is a verse that we like to use with regards to apologetics, and that's the defending of the faith. When we do it with gentleness and respect. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this critical pause tonight to give you these 2 questions is because they kind of relate to the command that we just went over, thou shalt not kill, or do not murder. And then Peter went on and said, "Keep a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander." So that's the purpose of apologetics. "For it is better, if it is God's will, for us to suffer for doing good than for doing evil." Now, the 2 questions that we need to be prepared to answer are these. First, why did God order Saul to kill the Amalekites? How many of you ever heard of that? How many of you ever heard of that? Well, how many of you have never talked to an atheist? Because if you've never spoke to an atheist who's what I call maybe one of the new atheists, this is going to be a burning question they're going to confront you with. How could a gracious, good God, a benevolent God that you say you serve, order the genocide of a whole group of people called the Amalekites? How many of you didn't know that was even in there? That God ordered that? Well, that's why I'm bringing it up now, so you're not shocked one day. Okay? The second question that we're going to discuss tonight, because this kind of springboard off to the next one, is why does God allow evil or suffering in the world? And you're going to be asked that question as well. You probably have asked it yourself. So we're going to look at these two questions, and they kind of relate to one another because the reason I wanted to cover the Malachite question is because being a defender of the faith and being a defender of the character of God, the new atheists they're literally accusing God of killing or murder, which is in violation to the very law he gave. And so you need to be able to know how to answer that as you talk with folks. Now, these are called the four horsemen of the new atheist. They're one's what does it say over there? I can't read right. It's a scientist. This guy's a scholar. He's a philosopher, and they call this is Dawkins. I think he's dead now. Isn't Dawkins dead? Isn't he dead now? Oh, he's not dead. Oh, Dawkins is down here. I mean, what's this guy's name? He's dead. I can't think of his name now, but he's kind of Hitchens, and he's dead. But they have all written books, and I guarantee you the two questions I just gave you are going to be in some form or fashion mentioned within these books. So this is one reason I wanted to cover this tonight, so that you could intellectually as well as spiritually answer these two questions. In order to do this, you're going to have to learn how to flip the framework. Matter of fact, you need to learn how to do that anyway with regards to any question when you're talking to an unbeliever, whether it's an unbeliever or also an atheist. You know, you could be a person that kind of agnostic, says, there might be a God or whatever. But you got to flip what I call flipping the framework. For instance, sometimes I'll be talking to a person about salvation, and they'll say, I don't know if I even really believe that there is a God, so forth and so on. And when I'm talking about framework, from their framework, if they don't believe that there is a God, are they on a different framework than I am? They're thinking totally different than me or you. So you've got to somehow get them from their worldview or their framework to thinking this way. And here's one way you can do that. First, I will say to that person who will, I'm trying to lead to salvation or something, to get them, he's going, well, there's just not a God. I just don't believe that a God. Well, if a God doesn't exist, what does he have to be saved from? What does he have to be saved from? Nothing. If God doesn't exist, if there's no heaven, no hell, then what does he have to be saved from or to? That's how he's thinking. So you got to flip it. So how do you go about flipping it? Well, you say something along this line. You say, okay, you're right. If God does not exist, first of all, when I say you're right, guess what they go? Oh, he's a good guy. He thinks I'm right. I'll say, well, if you're right that there is no God, there's no heaven or hell, then there's nothing for you to be saved from. And they're pretty happy when you say that. But when I say flip the framework, here's what I'm talking about. But if you're wrong and I'm right, and there is a God, and there is a heaven, and there is a hell, then you have everything to lose and nothing to gain. So that's flipping the framework by asking the right question. Y'all get that? Do you understand what I'm saying? At least you get to thinking, well, what if there is a God? See, he's gone from thinking there is no God, and now when you ask that kind of question, what are you putting in his mind? Just like, what's the goal of an atheist, by the way, when they bring up these questions? To put doubt in your mind. Is that not right? So when I say we're flipping the framework, what are we trying to do in them? We're trying to put doubt in what they believe. Okay? Because that's the whole goal. Of course, you and I are doing it for what purpose? To help. We want them to be saved. We want them to experience the new life that can be found in Christ. It can literally change their whole world. And so that's what you got to do. You got to flip the framework. Their framework, they're coming from now, given they believe in any question they ask, given that God does not exist. Okay? They're approaching it from that. And from our framework, we're looking at Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Okay? That's the framework we're coming from. That we believe there's a God, that he exists, and that he's everything that the Word says that he is. They're coming from a framework, there is no God. Then, so when you begin to talk with them, the one thing they're going to do in order to discredit that there is a God, because quite frankly, between me and you and the whole world that's watching on the internet, I don't think there's a real atheist. Most of the people that I've met that says that there is no God say it because they're angry at God. Or they're angry about something. Or they're guilty and shamed about something. Ashamed about something. And it's easier to believe that there is no God than have to deal with what's really going on in their heart. And so they may entertain some things. They may even say, I'll get to that in a minute. So one thing they like to do is they say, well, there's no God, because if there was a God, God wouldn't act like this. And they attack the very character of God. Well, now, who loves to attack the character of God? Satan does. Okay? Now, first, another thing I want you to know, it is dangerous to make God into what I call a pie chart God. Okay? A pie chart God. You say, what's a pie chart? Y'all know what a pie chart is, don't you? Okay? And that's where we compartmentalize God. Okay? And you can't do that. It's just like you. How would you like if we said, well, here's you at this, here's you as a dad, here's you as a worker wherever it is that you work, and here is you at church, here's you on the ball field as an athlete, and you divide yourself up into all these things, but is any one thing you? No, you got to look at you in the what? In the whole, as dynamic as that. And that's not even bringing into compass the perception that others have of you. For instance, take Jesus. He's the most misunderstood human being that's ever walked on the face of this planet. Is there only one real Jesus? Okay. And I think I've shared with you how people want to see the real Jesus, the authentic Jesus. But isn't it just as dangerous for people, and we're still in this today, is the perceptions that people have about Jesus can be propagated, and many people can believe your particular perception about Jesus, and it's really not Jesus, who Jesus is at all. But yet, a perception of Jesus can develop quite a following. And this happens in the world today, doesn't it? Because they'll take one little piece of Jesus and they'll make a whole doctrine out of it, but they don't take it in the totality of everything that Jesus teaches, which we talked about a few weeks ago. And they make this whole doctrine or this whole thing, and they begin to believe it, that this is the way he is, and it's a distortion of the character and the perception of Jesus. That's why we have to watch this. Now I'm going to try to give you an example of what I'm talking about with this pie chart thing. How many of y'all like the hymn, How Great Thou Art? Okay? Now imagine when the person who wrote How Great Thou Art wrote it and put it to music. Do you believe he was inspired? I do. I don't know that I could write a song that good if I wasn't inspired. I think he was inspired. And probably when he wrote that, he got so excited. I've written things, I preached sermons, I thought, man, this is one thing. If you ever done anything where you felt like God was working and moving in you, it's an awesome feeling. And I'm sure he felt that way. And then, How Great Thou Art, how many times do you think it's been sung since the original writer wrote it? Don't just think about how many times it's been sung. Think about how many different people have recorded and sung the song. It's just absolutely amazing, isn't it? And it's become one of the great all-time hymns. Matter of fact, is it number one in the book? Y'all got the book? Is it? It's in the top 5 probably. How Great Thou Art. I don't remember number 2. It's down low somewhere. I don't know. I guess it depends on what hymnal you put it in. All right, it's in the top 10 then. Well, they're not ranked according to importance, because well, I mean, he's kind of towards the front there. I guarantee you though, every hymnal probably has "How Great Thou Art" in it. It's a tremendous, tremendous song. It's wonderful to sing it. It's wonderful to hear it. It's just a wonderful song. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about. When you go into a typical church and they sing "How Great Thou Art," how many people do you think get the original inspiration of the writer when he wrote it, what's intended? Why? Well, look at this. A hymn starts here. You got to, first of all, he'll say, turn to hymn number 10. They got to spend some time finding the hymn, if they even pick the hymn up to open it up to find the hymn to start with, because how many people in the congregation do you think is not willing to sing it at all? That's a good question. The song starts. Now, let me tell you why this pie chart hit me. Because I've been sitting, years ago when I was like 20 years old, I was sitting in a pew, didn't really want to be there. And all these feelings I'm going to share with you went through my heart and my mind. By the time I figured out what was going on, I was singing whatever was left of verse 1. I finally tuned in to verse 2. And, you know, if you're in a church that believes in doing all the verses instead of the first, second, and fourth one, you might sing verse 3. Now, the original guy who wrote the song, How Great Thou Art, probably, do you think he wrote every verse intending for them to be sung? Because probably, and if you look at it, it builds upon each other. But somewhere, someone decided we should not do all, how many verses they have? 4? We should not do all 4 verses. Why? Because the preacher's going to go long today. So we should do the first, the second, and the 4th verse. So when you get to verse 3, and you haven't done it, but this week, for some reason, the music person wants us to do all 4 verses, and you get this little bad taste in your mouth because you've got to sing verse 3. And then you make it the first line of verse 4, and you sing it because you're mad. Because then there's time spent looking at what's coming up next to see how long till the end of the service. And then if you see some birds flying outside, if you don't have stained glass windows and clear windows, you can see. Now, let me tell you why I brought this up. Is because, let's be honest, you can pick a hymnal up and sing How Great Thou Art and totally miss the purpose of the song. Why? Why? Because your heart's not right. What did Jesus say? It all goes back to what? The heart. It's from the heart that everything deceitful flows. And from the time you walk in the building until the time you walk out, what's he after? It's the Satan. He's after the same thing God's after. Your heart. And one of the ways, if he can divide and make you put God in a pie chart, the way you could put a hymn into a pie chart. Because instead of thinking about what the song means and the power behind it and what the words mean, I mean, we pick it apart. We put it in a pie chart. What's the music like? See, some people like the music more than the message. And then others go, oh, the music's all right and everything, but what's the message like? You know, we dissect it. And are we doing the first? Are we doing the second? Or is the first as good as the fourth? And we miss the whole intent and purpose of the song. Do y'all understand what I'm trying to say to you? And it's just, and we do God the same way. So, here we go again. How'd that happen? All right. You've got to put everything, just like you'd put a hymn, in a proper context. For instance, let me go back to that hymn thought for just a minute. I read an article not too long ago about the tragedy in Guyana. Y'all know what I'm talking about? The Jonestown Massacre. Took place in 1978. Which is in violation of one of the Ten Commandments. Yes. Thou shalt not what? Kill. Jim Jones took a group of people, preacher, educated, over in California, took them down to Guyana. Some of the families, you know, because they felt it was a cult, said, we got to figure out what's going on. I'm not going to go into the whole story. But the senator that was investigating them flew down there, spent the night. Of course, they put out their best. And you can actually go and see a YouTube video of the senator that was down there. And guess what they were doing? They're singing songs. They're singing hymns. They're singing even popular music songs. They had a tremendous band. They had a saxophone player. They had a bugle player. They had everything. You know, I mean, it was just, you know, you watch it and you go, hey, you know, these people aren't. Matter of fact, the senator even told Jim Jones, he says, you know, I'm going to go back and tell everybody everything's going fine. But in Jim Jones' mind, he knew the end was coming. They'd already prepared for that. He had already ordered for the concoction that would take place the next day, in which they would all drink the Kool-Aid. You know where we get the phrase, drink the Kool-Aid? It's from Jonestown Massacre. The senator leaves with his entourage. He sends and dispatches a group of people out there to massacre and kill the senator and his entourage. And they come back and they begin this whole sordid evil, and it's evil, of killing every man, woman, and boy by a group suicide. And there's music playing. Now, one of the songs was not How Great Thou Art. Because if it had been, would that have totally changed how people view how great thou art? I read an account of where one of the survivors of Jonestown said there's certain songs they can't listen to anymore because they were being played during that time. You could see how one perceives how great thou art would totally change their perception of how great thou art, but does it change the greatness of that hymn? This is what I'm trying to tell you. Sometimes something happens in people's lives, and even though they're dead wrong by having that perception, it's something they experience that triggers that perception. And they have wrong thoughts and they have wrong thinking, like I say, stinking thinking about God because of wrong actions that someone else committed and took place. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to tell you? Sometimes I hear people say, I just can't hear that song in church anymore because it was played at my daddy's funeral. Well, what changed was not the greatness of the song, or not even what the message of the song's about. What changed was the perception of that person towards the song because of an event in their life. No right or wrong, that's the perception. Okay? So I wanted to kind of put that. So you've got to put everything in its proper context, and we're going to put 1 Samuel 13:15 in this proper context. Saul had assumed rule over Israel. Y'all know who Saul was, right? Okay. Who followed Saul? David. And Saul, what was the problem that Saul? Saul was mentally unstable, wasn't he? Why? Because he was jealous. And jealousy is rooted in anger, isn't it? He fought against their enemies on every side. Moab, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. Because Saul had been given the task of reclaiming the land, for the kingdom. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. All the days of Saul, there was bitter war. I'm skipping around in these 3 chapters, by the way. In all the days of Saul, there was bitter war with the Philistines, and wherever Saul saw a mighty or brave man, he took him into his service. So here we find Saul is, what's all around him? Enemies. And what are they doing? The Philistines, the Amalekites, they were not good campers. These were not people that you wanted to be around. They were evil. Read the history of the Amalekites and the Philistines. Child sacrifice. The Amalekites were involved in child sacrifice. These were bad actors. Okay? Samuel said to Saul, I'm the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over the people of Israel, so listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Now, he gets this message through Samuel, who's a prophet, to Saul. He says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came from Egypt. So what's God doing here to the Amalekites? He's punishing them. And what is he punishing them for? All the evil things they did when you were coming from Egypt. So there was a history with God with the Amalekites. This is not just some one-time random event that God says, I'm going to blow my top in my anger and I'm going to have all the Amalekites killed. There is a history with the Amalekites that precedes this one instruction by Samuel given to Saul to completely obliterate them. Because what were the Amalekites doing? What were the Amalekites doing? They had been killing them. Okay? Now realize we're not talking, an individual hurting an individual. We're talking about a massive group of people hurting one another. Let me put it into an historical context that you might could understand today, because this is already happening. Y'all remember I think it was in November, when the Palestinians invaded Israel and killed all those people who were at that concert, all those, and took them off and did all these atrocities and things along that line. Now was that a one-time event between the Palestinians and the Israelis? That's been going on for what? Years and years and years and years. But it was not a single isolated event at all. This has been growing and growing and growing and growing. This was a similar situation. And by the way, if you turn on the news today, it's all about what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. That's what you're going to hear. They don't examine the totality of the history. Okay? So then he says, now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death, and this is where they get all, men, women, children, and infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. This is the verse that upsets people. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle, the fat calves and lambs, and everything that was good. They were running unwilling to destroy it completely, but everything that was despised and weak, and they totally destroyed. So what did Saul do? He disobeyed God and did only that partially. Now why? You think Saul was having second thoughts about what God said? Well, let's just let the Word answer it for us. The word of the Lord came to Samuel, and he says, I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, that's the prophet, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. So God's angry because Saul did not follow his instructions to destroy everything. That was his instructions. And first of all, who are we to tell God anything? If God had instructions to do it, there was probably a reason for it. Okay? Then so Samuel confronts Saul and he says, didn't God tell you to kill everything? He says, I hear the bleating of sheep. You didn't destroy everything. And he confronts Saul with his unwillingness to obey the full command of the Lord. And here's what he says. Saul says to Samuel, I have sinned, I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. And here he gives the reason why. He says, because what? I was afraid of the men. Whose men? His men. And so I gave in to them. Tell you what, the decision wasn't even popular among his men. Now, 1 Samuel 13:15 was by no means the biggest genocide example of the Bible. This is what gets me. They want to pick this one example, but can you name any other incidences where God ordered the death of people? I think we can find a bigger one, don't you? But they rarely talk about that. You can go and buy arks and see pretty pictures and everything, but I have never encountered an unbeliever say to me, why did God punish the whole earth? They always bring up this. Maybe it's because God commands. See, God killed the people in the flood with sending the great flood, but here he's commanding people to kill people. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But there's plenty of examples of where God punishes evil by killing people. Well, give me another one. Sodom and Gomorrah. They don't bring that up. And this was not the first interaction between Israel and the Amalekites. The Amalekites were not just a threat to Israel, but they were also a very threat to the plan of God. Because what was their goal? What was the Amalekites' goal? If you read the scriptures closely, they wanted to annihilate Israel. And they were way more warlike than even the Philistines. They were bad actors. So God said, annihilate them. Because not only did they have, men and, but it's also their false religion, their false worship, their corruption. And God wanted to put an end to it. Y'all know who this is? This just came out this week. Matter of fact, maybe yesterday or today. Charlotte Church is a singer over in England. Okay, and this came a real big controversy because she was at a charity concert, an event, and she helped lead them in the song "From the River to the Sea." You know what that song's about? It's pro-Palestinian. You know what the song's about? From the river to the sea? Genocide of the Israelis. We want to clean them out from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And if you listen to Palestinians, that's what they're going to tell you. They do not want the nation of Israel to exist. They want them wiped off the map. Now you'll have some, Palestinians who are moderate, who will claim they want a two-state solution. But if you get to the fundamental of like Hamas, Hezbollah, they want to wipe Israel off the map. They want all the Jews dead. That same spirit, still even exists today. Now, what is God interested in punishing? Sin. And this is where people mess up. They think now through Jesus, because Jesus came, God winks at sin. God has always hated sin. Does God still hate sin? Is God still going to punish sin? Yes, He is. God, in His justice, will not wink at sin because of His justice. It's amazing. We have even liberal theologians, they want justice. They cried, "We want justice, we want justice." Well, God's going to mete His justice out, but it's going to be done fairly, equitably, and righteously. And we got to understand that God's not going to wink at our sin. And that's where the second question comes in. He has planned to judge it. Why does He want to judge it? Because our problem is we refuse to take sin seriously. This is what Jesus is trying to teach us in the Sermon on the Mount. Sin separates us from God. And because of that, God's going to punish sin, but God's going to do it in a wonderful way that we like to preach about. So why did God then allow evil in the first place? Because the Amalekites, were they evil? Yes. Were the Philistines evil? Well, the bigger question is, why did God allow evil in the first place? Our human logic says if God is all-knowing, if He knows there's evil, and He's all-powerful, that means He has the power to stop evil, and He's all-good, then evil shouldn't exist. That's how we think, isn't it? That's human logic. So why would God allow evil? You got to answer that question. This is a big question, because if you can't answer this question, then you're not going to be able to talk to anyone, because they're upset about this. They think, first of all, by questioning God and by saying that God's allowing evil, they're attacking the very character of God, because they're saying that if God allows evil, then He's what? Then He's evil. Does that make sense? So you got to talk about this question. And it's uncomfortable, isn't it? Because you and I, do we believe God's evil? He doesn't have an evil bone in His body. Well, I didn't like the way I said that. Well, Jesus had a body. He's God in the flesh. Did Jesus have any evil in Him? No. Why would God allow evil? Well, here's one reason, I believe, is to reveal our heart as opposed to His. And you say, well, why is that? Because we, if you read Romans, and one day we're going to study the book of Romans, maybe after we get through the harmony of the Gospels, Paul so concisely reports everything. The problem we have is we are totally depraved sinners. We were born that way. There's nothing in us that seeks God. It's the human condition. And it goes all the way back to when? Adam and Eve. The fall. And the humans have been that way ever since. And you say, well, that's not fair that I'm punished by the actions of one man, the first Adam. That's what you like to say, isn't it? Well, that's not fair. Well, hold on to that thought. The first man made, God put him in a perfect place. Everything was perfect. Was there evil? Yes. But there was no evil in him. And he put him in a garden, and whether you interpret, I haven't interpreted literally, but some people, and he said there's a tree here, and it's called the tree of the knowledge of what? And he said, do not what? Partake of it. And the moment God did that, what did he give to Adam and Eve? A free choice. Which I also happen to believe in the free will of man. And then you get another question, how is God sovereign and man free? We'll talk about that in a minute. But he gave us a choice. Now, why would God do that? Because, see, if he didn't give us a choice, correct. And if he didn't give us a choice, what are we? Puppets and robots. So he gives us a choice because he wants to have a real relationship with us. And to have a real relationship with one, you don't make a person a robot or a puppet. To have a real relationship, then there has to be that capacity to choose. So God gives us that choice. And so, to give us that freedom to choose, then good must have what? Evil. And not only that, how would you know what was even good if there was not the presence of evil? So did God create evil? No. So when you say, okay, if God's all powerful and he's all knowing and he's all this, he must have created evil then, because no, he didn't create it. Who created it? Satan. And you can read about the fall of Satan. I'm going to get into all that. We'll let Greg do it on Sunday night. Satan is the author of evil, who through his pride, because if you read the prophecy of Isaiah, it is definitely through his pride that he rebelled, led a rebellion in heaven against God. He is the author of evil. So when you accuse God of being evil, you attack the very character of God when you ought to be attacking whose character? Satan. And that's the other problem the atheists have. If they don't believe in God, do you think they believe in Satan? No, they don't believe in anything spiritual. But our way answers a lot of the reasons why the world's the way it is. Because there's a force of good and there's a force of evil. And you and I have been allowed by God to have a choice. And because we succumbed to the deception of the evil one, we chose wrongly. At least Adam and Eve did. And ever since, we've been under the fall. And it reveals our hearts as opposed to God's heart. Now, this solidifies the argument for free will. And how could man be free and God sovereign? Let me give you an illustration I like to give. How could man be free, but yet God be sovereign? I had my children, and it's kind of a rough illustration. It's my children in the front yard by the road. Where God gave this to me was in Old Tuckaloosa. There was a real busy highway between Water Valley and Paris, Mississippi, called Highway 315. Very dangerous road. We happened to live in the curve of the road, and it was one place I told my kids, never what? Go there. Now, they didn't happen to have a choice. I mean, that choice was there because the road was there. And every day they got out and played out in the front yard. We sitting on the thing. You know how fast kids can move. The road wasn't that far. It wouldn't take just 1 minute. One of them could be where? In the road. Now, I could take my child, put them in the front yard, and I could say to them, because I'm their father, do not go to that road. I could give that command. Does that mean they're not going to go to that road? And matter of fact, out of my 4 children I've had, because I love them, I care for them, and I know them, and there's no way I know my kids better than God knows me or you. But out of my 4 children, if I had to put money on the child that would be more apt to go to the road, do you think I know which one it would be? Yes, I do. And I could say to my child, you are not to go to that road. And I could let them play. But just so I know really how they are, where their heart is, I give them that freedom to do that. And I can tell you, the child that would go would be my youngest daughter, Kristen. She would be the one that would be more apt to go to the road. I could see her inching just because I said, don't go to the road. She'd be inching over there. She'd be looking back to see if I'm looking. She has the freedom to go to the road. And I in my sovereignty can even know what her heart is. I can know exactly what she's going to do and how she's going to do it. But what that choice does is reveals to me her true heart. Does that make sense to you? How God's sovereignty can exist, but yet a person also have free will. It's hard to explain it, but that's the best illustration I have. You cannot understand God, though, even with human thinking. You just can't do it. He's too big, and I could say some stuff that would blow your mind. I'm not going to do it tonight. Because we're always putting God in a box. That's our problem. We want to put him on our level. Here's a little picture, 2 different views. For instance, see, here's God. What box is he in? The church. And God has nothing against the church. He established it. But is God bigger than the church? He's much bigger. I like this picture better. We can put God in a box. And he's much bigger than that. And that's why whenever you start thinking about the things of God, you need to always remind yourself who he is and who we are not. Okay? So, didn't I ask you to give me a paper clip? Well, what did I do with it? Did you get more than one? You gave it to me? Yes, I did. Oh, here it is right here. Well, let's use you, Chuck. Come on up. And you got to hurry up because we only got 4 minutes left. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is take this paper clip, and I want you to make a 4-sided circle with it.
4-sided circle? Is this a trick?
No.
I can't make a circle with sides.
Hmm?
Can't make a circle with sides
Why?
because it's round. A square has sides.
All right, here's what I'm talking about. Here's why I told you to do that. So you can't do it, can you?
No.
people say, well, God's sovereign. He's all powerful. He can't do this. So let me ask you, if I ask God to make a four-sided circle, could God do it? Could he?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's God.
Yeah, but you've never seen a four-sided circle. What? Why wouldn't he? Because he's ordained that a circle has what? His law, his immutable law. A circle that has no what? And a square has four sides. Something he has purposed. Do you see what I'm trying to carry you to? Is that God has placed certain laws in this universe for a reason, for his purposes. And he could change any of them that he wants to, for whatever reason. But he chooses not to. And so it's kind of stupid to say, well, that's kind of like, can God build a rock? Can God make a rock so big that he can't pick it up? I mean, that's a straw man argument. It's a fallacy. And yet this is how we approach things in the Scripture. Now, thank you, Chuck. I got to bring this to a conclusion. You can't, because that is how God designed it. He didn't design us to be able to make a four-sided circle out of a paper clip, because it's not how he designed a circle or a square. And we have to work within the parameters of the law that he gave us, because we're finite human beings. If he didn't want to make a circle, he could have created whatever he wanted to do. Until you see the monster in the world and yourself, you cannot see the goodness of God. This goes back to the question of sin and evil. Until we see the evil in the world, we cannot see the goodness of God. And it's not going to help us by trying to claim that God's evil. John Stott said, before we can begin to see the cross as something done for us, we have to see it as something done by us. Who put Jesus on that cross? The Jews? The Pharisees? Did the Romans? Did we do it? No, let's be clear on this. The Bible's clear on this. Jesus said, I laid down my life. I laid down my life for you. You're not taking my life. You know why he's saying that he laid down his life from you? Because it was in the plan, the economy of God to do so. And he had the power to do it. He said, I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up. But why did he do it then? Then the question is, well, why would he do that? Why would God become flesh, dwell among us, put up with the stuff that he put up with, be crucified, betrayed by his own, crucified, to be raised from the third day? Well, the Scriptures tell us that he who knew no sin, which was our problem, which is still our problem, he who knew no sin became sin in our behalf. And all of the righteous indignation of God was poured out upon him. God's wrath against the evil world were poured out from him so that we might be what? Saved. That's the gospel message. And so you say, well, I can't believe that I have to believe in one man, Jesus, to deal with the problem that I have. And you know you have the problem. Because given the choice to do wrong, what do we choose? If we can do wrong and know we get away with it, what do we pick? Every time. Any righteous bone we have in our body is because God put it there. And you go, well, it's just not fair that what Adam and Eve did in the garden, they would affect all of mankind and so forth and so on. Well, God in his fairness, through the actions of one man, Jesus, removed the biggest problem that you have in your life, and that is sin. How can you say God's not fair? All he's asking you to do is give him your what? Which is what he was after to start with. In the garden. Does this make sense? Evil was perpetrated upon this world because we chose it. And people still choose it. And we live in a world filled full of sinners who choose it every day. And as a result of all those sins, like we talked about last week, there's murders, there's killings, there's so forth and so on. How many times did I say, if someone comes in my house, invades my house, and I have an access to and he lines my children up on the wall, he lines my wife up on the wall and says all the vile things they're going to do to us, what's going to happen? In this world of sin and woe and war, we have three choices. We have a choice between good and evil. That choice is always easy for those of us who know God. What do we choose? We choose good. And sometimes there's a choice between two goods. Who was it? Amy Gators was offered 2 jobs in one day. I don't know what to do. What should I do? I've been offered 2 jobs. I said, the choice is easy. What do you choose? The best of the 2 goods. You find out what's the best of the 2 goods. And then sometimes in life, and it's going to happen, some of you have already experienced it, you are placed into a position where you have a choice between lesser of 2 evils. And you can get real spiritual and sanctimonious on me, and you can say, not me, preacher. No way I'll do evil. Well, what if the choice is this? You have a choice of seeing your whole family and you slaughtered in the front of everyone else, or you happen to have a pistol, and you can take the guy out. Kill one to save your whole family. Neither choice is good. It's the same choice America had. Keep letting the war rage in Europe. See 6 million more Jews killed, or go do something about it. Same choice. Difference in righteous indignation and true and pure evil. And so you're going to put on God what he did. What do you know? I can tell you this about God. He doesn't do a single thing without a purpose and a true and right reason. And if he told Saul to kill the Amalekites and to wipe every one of them off the face of the map, even the cattle, I guarantee you it was for a good reason, because God is good. Tough choices, isn't it? Because we live in an evil world. But I think it's high time we quit accusing God of being something that he's not. And he's not evil. He's trying to clean the mess up. And one day, guess what? The good news is he's going to clean the mess up. For what then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all. One of you will say to me, why does God still blame us? For who is able to resist his will? But who are you, a human being, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out the same lump of clay, some pottery for special purpose and some for common use? Oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable his judgments, his path beyond tracing out. Oh, the depth, who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. I like where the Old Testament prophet says, where were you when he stretched forth the universe? So you got to flip the framework. And you got to say, yeah, there's evil in the world, but I can tell you this, God didn't put it here. God didn't put it here. Who put it here? Because let me tell you, they know there's evil in the world. Well, why is it here? And who's doing it? And why they're doing it? Okay? We'll talk more later. But why did I bring this up? Because Jesus said, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill. But what do? They like to turn to the New Testament. Guess who did kill him? Guess who did kill? God did. God ordered Saul, you people kill. Well, if God orders a killing and it's expected, and let me tell you, the killing is not over with. Then finally, this is my last point. You and I look at everything on the basis of the here and now. This life. God looks at things on the basis of eternity. And you think, oh, he killed somebody, he lost his life. Let me tell you, when a person loses their life, it's not the end. It's just the beginning. The question is, where they're going to spend that eternity. So see, you're looking at things, and I'm looking at things from a finite point of view. Oh, he killed somebody. Well, no, he didn't. Because we're not to fear the first death, according to the scriptures. We're to fear what? The second, the spiritual death. And it's a much more deadly thing than any physical death. And that's what God sent Jesus for, to prepare us for, is he doesn't want us to experience the second death, which the Bible says is the only death to fear. So, I told you last week, I'm a proponent of capital punishment. I still am and will be till Jesus comes. Because I believe in what Genesis says when it says, when a person sheds a human blood, by the government or by humans shall that person's blood be shed, because of their loss for the respect of life. Because of righteous judgment. All right, let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for your word. I thank you for its truth and its power, and I pray that we would not put you in a box, but we realize who you really are, and that we would not assault your character by our finite perceptions of who you are, because we're angry, because we're upset, because we live in such an evil world of sickness and suffering, and that sickness and suffering, most of the time, is self-imposed. So Lord, deliver us, as you told us to pray. Deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Y'all have a good